Psalm 126. When God restored the fortunes of Zion, we were like those who dream. Then our mouth was filled with laughter and our tongue with shouts of joy. Then it was said among the nations, God has done great things for them. God has done great things for us, and we rejoiced. Restore our fortunes, O God, like the watercourses of the Negeb. May those who sow in tears reap with shouts of joy. Those who go out weeping, burying the seed for sowing, shall come home with shouts of joy, carrying their sheaves. May those who sow with tears reap with shouts of joy. It's a beautiful line, isn't it? There's so much emotion packed in there, tears and joy. But why does the psalmist speak of sowing with tears? I'm not a farmer. I have never been a farmer. But when I imagine sowing seeds, I imagine it to be a joyful practice, planting seeds in pleasant anticipation of the crops that you will help to grow, the crops that you will harvest and eat and enjoy. That sounds like fun. So why the tears? To understand the tears of the psalmist, I think we need to understand where the psalmist is writing from. Psalm 126 is what's referred to as the post-exilic psalm, which is a fancy way of saying that the psalmist wrote it after the exile to Babylon, after the Babylonians had defeated the Israelites, after they had destroyed the beloved Zion, the city of Jerusalem. This psalm was composed by an Israelite who, after seeing her homeland destroyed, was made to walk the long trek to Babylon. An Israelite who was forced to abandon the land that God had promised and delivered to God's people. This psalm was written by an Israelite who was trying to come to grips with life in a foreign land, life after the destruction of God's city. It is from this great loss that the tears of which the psalmist speaks rise. The people sow in tears because they can no longer sow seed in the promised land. They must tend a land that is not theirs. They must tend the land of the peoples who destroyed their home and their temple, the people who attempted to destroy the Israelites themselves. In this context, the question is no longer why they sow in tears, but why they sow at all. Sowing seeds is a practice that only makes sense if one believes in a future where one might reap with shouts of joy. But the Israelites do not have such a future. There is no end to their despair in sight. There are but a few Israelites amongst a sea of Babylonians. They have no hope of revolt. Their city has been destroyed. There will be no rescue mission. There's nobody coming to save them. And despite what the psalmist says, there is no amount of sowing seeds that's going to fix this problem. When the harvest comes, they will still be a defeated people. They will still be cut off from their home, and they will still be living amongst their oppressors. There will be no shouts of joy. So why sow in tears? Why bother? What is the point of struggling and surviving when you know that change is impossible? The despair that the Israelites must have felt that first year in Babylon, it must have been unimaginable. And yet, we too know something of despair. We know of public school systems that are so broken that just the thought of fixing them is overwhelming. We know of poverty so intractable that we have come to accept it as normal. We know of unemployment that goes on and on without a job offer in sight, when we cannot help but feel foolish and futile for filling out yet another application. More often than we would like to admit, we are searching for reasons to go on sowing in tears. We are searching for a reason to believe that our efforts are not futile. I can remember a time when I felt overwhelmed by the futility of the task ahead of me. You see, right after college, I took a job as an AmeriCorps VISTA volunteer. VISTA is a volunteer in service to America. It's a program that's a year long where the federal government pays you starvation wages to work with community organizations and nonprofits. The position that I received involved developing a literacy curriculum for 6 to 9-year-olds in an inner-city community center. But before I got to begin my year of service, I had to go to a weekend training retreat in Chicago. So I remember that retreat, the first night of it. We were in a hotel ballroom filled with nervous young people like myself, and we were all looking up at the front where there was a PowerPoint being projected and a man with a microphone who was going through the PowerPoint and explaining to us the history and the mission of the VISTA program. I was maybe not paying as much attention as I should have, but towards the end of the presentation, I caught him saying, "What is your job as an AmeriCorps VISTA worker?" So my ears perked up. This seemed important. And then the slide changed, and the whole room read aloud, "To eliminate poverty." I was shocked by the audacity of it. To eliminate poverty? You've got to be kidding me. I thought that sounds like a wildly ambitious goal for my 6 to 9-year-old class. I mean, what a huge responsibility. As far as I know, the world has never been without poverty, and yet I was expected to eliminate it in 1 year on a $10,000 stipend. Why? Why did they put such an impossible goal in front of us at the very beginning? Why doom us to failure? And yet, this is exactly what the psalmist does. She begins by lifting up an impossible goal. She dreams of the restoration of Zion. When God restored the fortunes of Zion, we were like those who dream. Then our mouth was filled with laughter, and our tongue with shouts of joy. But God has not restored the fortunes of Zion. All too recently, those fortunes were destroyed. God's people are living in despair in a foreign land, with no hope whatsoever of being restored to Zion. They cannot find it in themselves to sow seeds, and the psalmist dreams of the restoration of Zion. The Israelites have about as much chance of restoring Zion as I did of eliminating poverty. So what makes the psalmist raise this impossible goal? What is it that she knows that the people do not know? What is it that she remembers that they don't remember? I think what it is God's grace. You see, the psalmist believes in grace, in gifts from God. And gifts from God are not limited to the expected. No, grace is not limited to the possible. Gifts from God make the impossible possible. God has created a way out of no way before, and God will do so again. The psalmist remembers how God brought the people out of Egypt when they couldn't have accomplished it themselves. She remembers how God kept them alive in the wilderness when they could not feed themselves. The psalmist knows that God has done the impossible before, and she believes that God will do the impossible again. So when she awakes from her dream of restoration, the psalmist asks God to restore the fortunes of the people. Restore our fortunes, O God, like the watercourses of the Negev. And then she tells the people that the impossible will happen. She tells them that if they sow seeds in tears today, they will one day reap with shouts of joy. She does not say this because she thinks the people can restore Zion. Nor does she believe that if the people merely wait until the harvest season, God will have done it for them. She tells the people that the impossible will happen because it is belief in God's future that makes a place for God's grace in the present. If they can hold on to the impossible dream, if they can believe it is possible for God, they may be able to stave off despair. Holding to that impossible dream, they just might find the strength to survive, to struggle, to sow seeds despite the tears. And it is in that struggle that a place for grace opens up. It is in that struggle that the possibility of God's future breaks into the present. In my time as an AmeriCorps Vista volunteer, I did not eliminate poverty. In fact, I think it's safe to say that I didn't lift a single person out of poverty, but I did experience the grace of God that year. I formed relationships with the children and families that I worked with. I loved and was loved, cared and was cared for. I forgave and was forgiven. There were moments of sadness, but also moments of almost unbearable sweetness. And pieces of God's future did become manifest. Our struggle brought a computer lab to that community center. It started a class that continues today. The struggle that we engaged in made cracks through which God's future shone through. And none of that would have happened without that impossible dream from the PowerPoint presentation to eliminate poverty. Because without that dream, without that impossible commitment, how could you explain the decision to work for next to nothing in a thankless job in a forgotten neighborhood? There is no reason, but that is what each one of us in that room in Chicago was planning to do the next year. We were planning to struggle and to survive alongside others who were struggling and surviving. And it was the impossible dream that enabled that struggle for all of us. Even though we knew we couldn't do it alone, even if we weren't entirely sure God could do it, we all wanted it, and we all committed ourselves to it. I believe that is the message the psalmist would give us today. Hold on to your impossible dreams. Not because you can achieve them, but because when you believe that God can achieve them, you open a place for grace in your life. Holding to impossible dreams gives the strength to survive and to struggle, and that struggle is exactly the place where grace comes to us. I cannot promise you that you will see your impossible dream come true, but I am sure that you will experience the grace of God somewhere in that struggle. Amen.